What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Always Hope podcast, a production of Willwood's Faith in Marriage. My name is Dr. Mario Sacasa, and welcome to my show. Grateful to have you here with me. Many blessings to you wherever this episode may find you today. I pray that you just take a second here to rejoice that you're alive, that God is good, that He loves you, and that we are here together sharing this time and this experience. And so many blessings to you. Thank you for giving me your time. Joining me on the show today is Jason Evert, popular Catholic speaker and author of the book Male, Female, Other, A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. In today's episode, we discuss the sensitivity surrounding transgenderism, how this became a major issue of our time, the philosophical underpinnings of modern gender theory, guidance for parents, solutions to this problem, and pastoral responses to individuals who are struggling with gender dysphoria. Is there a way that we can look at this and honor the individual of the person while not letting go of the truths of human sexuality? Yes, I believe that is the case, and in today's episode we're going to dive into understanding how we can do that. So if you find this show helpful, if you find this episode helpful, please share it with one other person who you think would benefit from it, or please consider leaving a rating or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, or sharing it on social media. Those little gestures, I promise you, help the show to be able to grow and to be able to find people who need to hear this message of hope. So thank you so much for being here with us. You're going to love today's conversation, and let's get into this with Jason Evert. Jason Evert, welcome to the Always Hope podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Man, it's a sincere pleasure, a gift to have you on the show, an honor, really. So let's just jump right into this. Listen, this book that you wrote here, Male, Female, Other, Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender, this is spectacular. I mean, sincerely, I just want to say that to you right out of the gates. I've been following this topic rather closely. I'm a therapist, and so I work with people who struggle with homosexual inclinations, individuals who have questions of transgenderism, family members, the whole bit. And for me, I guess what really struck a chord with me in this is that from the get-go and throughout the whole book, the tone that you take is one of dialogue, and one that is you're not. You're taking it certainly from a Catholic stance. Certainly, you're not watering down the teachings of the faith or in any way, compromising that or the truth or any of that stuff. But the disposition that's there is one that invites conversation and that invites dialogue. And I don't think I can say that sincerely about most of the resources that are coming kind of from the conservative side, which kind of breaks my heart a little bit. I'll just say, I thoroughly enjoyed What Is a Woman. I thought it was great, and the movie was excellent. But it's not a dialogue piece. I think Matt Walsh right out of the gates, says, anybody who subscribes to this stuff are just a bunch of idiots, which isn't exactly the place where you would say, hey, let me share this with my family members who are liberal leaning. That's not something that would invite dialogue. But this does. And I think you really nailed it, the right tone, throughout the whole book. And so I'm assuming obviously that was intentional. Just tell me a little bit about that. Like, why did you want to take that approach with this subject as opposed to some of the other approaches that are out there?
Yeah, well, I think, there's utility and different approaches in a sense. Like you think of What Is a Woman, in terms of like the warfare that's going on right now in terms of gender theory. Matt Walsh's movie.
I did it too. I'm sorry.
Is in a sense, it's kind of like air support. It's like a bunker busting bomb that gets dropped, that allows the infantry to move in and regain some ground. But there also need to be medics on the field. There need to be infantry going door to door. Everybody's got kind of a different role, and not to take a militant approach to this topic, but we first need to distinguish gender theory as an ideology from gender dysphoria, which impacts individuals. And so what Matt Walsh is doing is he's going after gender theory as an ideology to implode that whole thing for the sake of the individuals. He's not doing this because he doesn't love people who experience gender dysphoria. He's doing it because he loves them and he cares about children who are being indoctrinated in this stuff and preschool drag queen reading shows, stuff. He's not doing it because he doesn't love them. He's taking this firm approach because people need to be shaken out of their stupor and of people that are kind of sitting on the fence. Oh, I guess this is best for kids. Yeah, go along and you do you. So I think there's a utility in that approach to the right audience. to kind of rally the troops and wake up people that don't realize the depravity of what's going on in these clinics and to these young people. But then there also needs to take a different approach of, okay, let's listen to the gender dysphoria. And the phrase I use is with reverent curiosity. And in the sense of not for the sake of just blindly obeying gender theory and all these ideologies, but okay, what's the story under that person's, under that person's distress that they're experiencing? They're, in a sense, expressing their distress about something in and through their bodies. And what is it? Is it an issue of anxiety and depression? Is it childhood trauma? Is it broken family dynamics and bereavement? There's so many different stories that need to be listened to. And if we just take the approach of a purely apologetic response to that, oh no, here's what the Bible says, and here's what science says, it'll sway some, but not those that are really feeling like not at home in their own body. This deep lack of congruence between their bodily reality and this feeling that they wrestle with of not being born into the wrong body. We need to walk with these people in dialogue, in the sense of kind of holding onto the one hand and holding onto reality with the other hand, and not letting go of either hand.
Yeah. Amen. No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the tact that you offered there. Certainly there needs to be different approaches, and I'm all in favor of that. I guess as a therapist, and listen, I said, I love What Is a Woman. I've showed it. My kids will watch it. We've had great conversations about it. I think you're right. It's really eye-opening piece to say, if you haven't been aware of this before, this is something that will open your eyes to it. Yeah. But the therapist in me, of course, will gravitate more towards, I shouldn't say more towards, also genuinely appreciates the approach that you offered here, for the reasons that you offered, because people are struggling. And that question that you just said about, listen, this whole thing is, anytime I have a conversation with somebody about this, and you know this more than I do for sure, any discussion about sexuality, whether it's homosexuality, transgenderism, chastity and stuff, at the end of the day, like it's a conversation about human identity. It's a question about who we are. And that's why these things get so heated. Is it because anybody, nobody wants to feel that their identity is being threatened. No one wants to feel that that their sense of self is being questioned or is being demeaned in any form or fashion. And so that's why these things get so heated and so defensive, because it touches on questions of who we are as people. And so, the reality that there are people who have this struggle, that's a tough one. When you talk about like genuinely feeling that you are mismatched with your body. I guess, so as you were kind of doing this, tons of resources, commend you. You did definitely, there's no doubt you did your work with this. I think you said over 1,000 citations throughout the whole book, which is really incredible. So just, I guess, what's the first step here? Like, Catholics are listening to this and wondering, okay, what is an authentic Catholic response to this transgendered movement and thing that's happening? What would be
the first step is kind of what you were alluding to of why this is such a sensitive issue. It's almost sometimes like you feel like you're treating a burn victim, in the sense of like, okay, if I touch, there's this explosive reaction. Like if someone were to not use my pronoun of he, I'd be like, okay, whatever, I don't care. But then if you're not using their preferred pronoun of she or they or zir or whatever, you get this reaction that you're seeing. What the people are being accused of genocide. Like you're literally erasing a whole generation of people. It's like, and we hear that, okay, genocide. Okay, I'm thinking Stalin, I'm thinking Hitler, and you're accusing us of genocide because we're not using your preferred pronoun. Like, oh, you guys are out to lunch. That's the temptation of a lot of people, to just dismiss the absurdity of this ideology and this emotional overreaction, instead of being like, okay, well, wait a minute. Instead of just trying to dismiss these people and their feelings, why do they feel so strongly? And it's, as you said, because what we're touching at here is that the transgender identities, in a sense, give them a sense not only of identity, but of community and of mission. And those things are so deeply needed for all of us. It's almost like you're ripping the scab off of them, of just like, wait a minute, you're not just debating my pronoun. You're debating my existence. You're debating my whole support system. You're debating our entire mission, to have our own rights. And so we're tapping into a lot of deep things. I heard recently, Dr. Abigail Schreier, who wrote that book, Irreversible Damage, was asked, like, what about the religious component of the transgender ideology? She asked someone asked her about it, and she's like, let me get back to you. She thought about it for a year, and then she got back to the person, and she said, I think I found what it is. She said, in this secularized society where people don't even have souls in a sense anymore, that they've disbelieved that, these new gender identities are a secular soul for these people, that when they don't have that piece of themselves anymore, because spiritually they've kind of thrown God away, this gives them that sense of identity that's even more real in their perspective than even their own bodies. And that's why these gender identities are kind of overriding the obvious reality of biology. And so if we can kind of understand where they're coming from on this and why have this anaphylactic reaction to any questioning of it, I think we can approach the subject with a little bit more sensitivity, and we'll make more headway in our discussions with them.
Yeah, amen. Okay, so where is it coming from though? Like what's driving this? I mean, we know that things have been changing obviously the last 20 years for sure, but it seems like in the last 5 years, this has become like major, like just accelerant, bam, like this is everywhere.
Yeah.
What's driving that?
Yeah, I mean, well, the analogy that I kind of like to use is that if you saw like a massive flood hitting a village, you'd be like, okay, well, what caused the flood? Okay, well, it could be a lot of things. I mean, it could be the melting ice caps. It could be a torrential downpour of rain for a couple of weeks, springs breaking forth, a dam that's broken. Like all these things could be flooding in and making this one stream overflow and wipe out these villages. And so we're seeing the carnage downstream, but you kind of have to follow the tributaries up to, okay, where is this coming from? And you can look at it from a philosophical perspective of Marxism and second wave feminism. You could look at the medical history behind this and Dr. John Money and all the things that have happened there. You could look at it from a social media perspective of what Dr. Lisa Littman called rapid onset gender dysphoria, where typically gender dysphoria was something that afflicted a very small fragment of the population. It was predominantly young boys and middle-aged men. And then just in the past couple of years, the sex ratio has completely flipped, where it's typically adolescent females. We're not having like middle-aged women coming out and being like, oh, I'm non-binary. It's not happening. And what we're having is these adolescent females spending massive amounts of time on social media, on Tumblr, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram, experiencing these trans influencers who are basically saying, hey, if you don't feel at home as a girl in today's culture, you're not alone. I didn't either. But until I discovered that my identity is non-binary, and these girls are listening in, and these girls typically don't have boyfriends. They typically come from more progressive households. They're spending lots of time online. Oftentimes there's other psychological issues going on, whether it's anxiety, depression, high functioning autism. There's all this stuff stirring in the pot. And then they hear these people's stories like, wait a minute, that's me. I've always felt not that pleased with my body, as if any adolescent girl really does. And I don't feel like I fit this perfect norm of what a woman is supposed to be on Instagram, as if any woman does. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, top surgery, or a binder could be right for me. And so we didn't see a lot of this skyrocketing until Instagram came around, a lot of social media. It's with that was kind of like kerosene on this social contagion.
Yeah, so it was all there. It was ripe for it. We're talking just a few minutes about like the philosophies. You do a wonderful job of that in one of the chapters specifically. But I liked what you're saying there, which is that it's something that was kind of ripe for it. And so here we are now in social media that people are spending this time online. And it is, I forget if it's Lisa Littman's work or somebody else who said that it's like there's like a threshold of like a group of women, a group of young girls, and if it's like a couple of them start thinking this, then almost all of them start thinking it. And so that rapid onset gender dysphoria that you spoke about is a common phenomenon, and it is unfortunate. I know certainly men are struggling with this as well, but that's what Abigail. For pronounce her last name again, Shriver. Yeah. Her work is touching on the fact that like this is really affecting our young girls. Again, why do we think that? Like, why do we think that this is affecting young women more than men as it did before?
Well, we think it because it is, and we've got all the numbers to show it. Because these gender clinics are showing who's showing up at the doorstep, asking for puberty blockers. And it's the vast majority is young females. And like you said, they're coming in kind of these pods that they're in this, maybe a public school setting, and one comes out as non-binary. And before you know it, 2 say they're trans, and 3. And before you know it, there's 5, 6, 7 girls all kind of popping up. And these social contagion things have happened throughout history, whether it was cutting, whether it was eating disorders. These have been common sociological phenomenon that have happened, these psychological, contagion things. And it predominantly affects females, where they start to feel what the other's feeling and going through it together. And so we're not imposing this idea, oh, it's just a bunch of girls. Like, no, it is. I mean, you look what happened in the United Kingdom, the biggest gender clinic over there, Tavistock, is actually being shut down this spring because of lawsuits and things like that. And they realized that they did an audit of the girls going to this gender clinic, and it was vast majority female. And so they audited, I think it was 124 patients. How many of them did not have comorbidities of different issues going on in their life with autism, depression, anxiety, or whatever? 2.5%. Wow. 97.5% of the kids going to this clinic seeking to transition had other mental health issues going on in their life. But these clinics are just giving them one pathway of intervention. Oh, well, it's because you're trans. Here's your surgeries. Here's your puberty blockers. That's the answer to it all. So it's a very myopic, shallow way to view this. Oh, the answer is you're trans, instead of like, wait a minute, maybe there's some deeper issues going on here. But it's a lot easier to say, I hate my body, than it is to say, I hate myself. It's a lot easier to fight against your own physical body with hormones or whatever than it is to shadow box against depression or anxiety or autism. Like, how do you take a swing at that? And so the body, in a sense, becomes a false target of intervention. I remember Dr. Walt Heyer, who was detransitioned after many years of living as a woman, said for a time it was a wonderful distraction. But then after the surgeries and all that, the core issues were not being met. And then he realized, for me, in his case, it was a dissociative disorder, where the childhood trauma he went through, he was in a sense dissociating from his body as a trauma response. And so that's what's needed, is a more mental health-based, compassionate approach to hear the deeper stories of what's going on.
Yeah, the challenge with that, though, is that I'm a therapist. And so I go to my state conferences, and I'm part of professional organizations, and that's not what's being encouraged. And I think most conservative therapists fear losing their license over this. I mean, even having this conversation, I don't know. I mean, I've been canceled before, trying to go give a talk somewhere, and someone looked me up online and somehow determined that I was like this bigot. And I'm like, I don't think I am. I don't even know where you got that from, Like, I'd be hard pressed for anybody who actually listened to anything I said to come to that conclusion. Yeah. But still, just because my stance is not on the train, it's not part and parcel. And even somebody like J.K. Rowling, for example, who she's, 15 years ago when the last book came out in 2007, it was like a year after that, or a few months after that, she didn't announce that Dumbledore was gay, and everybody loved her. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, we knew the whole time. Why isn't it in the book, the whole thing? All of a sudden, fast forward to now, and now everybody vilifies her. Yeah. Exactly. Because she's a linguist. She cares about the English language, and she doesn't want the word woman to be lost from the lexicon. And so reducing somebody to simply by their parts, people who have vaginas or people who have uteruses, isn't sufficient to describe what a woman is. And so she's obviously on that. And so this is, I guess, when you talk about the counseling piece, it's hard for people to get good help because they're concerned about like this push. And I'm of the stance that, and I know you talk about this in the book, and the research absolutely supports this, that the majority of individuals who present with any sort of transgender thoughts outgrow it, outgrow it after adolescence. Yeah. That makes sense. Like you said earlier, what teenage girl feels comfortable in her body? What teenage boy feels comfortable in his body? I mean, like, who of us actually like, how many of us as adult men maybe feel comfortable? I mean, maybe adult men do a little more so than women, but like women generally don't. And so there's the sense of just kind of accepting that and recognizing that it's just that discomfort is there, and let's kind of play this thing out a little bit. But that kind of wait and see approach is viewed as anti-affirming. And the rush to have to affirm, the rush to have to kind of jump in there and get some treatment and get those puberty blockers and those hormones, that is absolutely the mandate that's coming down from the counseling profession. And so what can a parent do? I mean, like, how can a parent get the right help?
Yeah, well, I would say we need to look at the Scandinavian countries, United Kingdom, who's been doing this stuff longer than we have. How's it going over there? Well,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Dutch who pioneered this whole thing with the Dutch protocol of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone surgery, they're totally changing course over there. I mean, they're not going full, Catholic, conservative, whatever, but it's a lot harder to get these things now. If you go to a gender clinic now in the Netherlands and say, oh, my daughter's non-binary and she wants to have puberty blockers, they'll say, okay, well, why don't you fill out these forms? We've got an 18-month waiting list, and then we're going to take 9 months to determine if she's a suitable candidate for puberty blockers, and then we'll get back to you. And for the teenage girl, it's like, oh, by the time you guys figure it out and make up your mind, my puberty is going to be finished. And from their perspective, it's like, exactly.
That's kind of the point.
Because that's why in Finland, Sweden, it's a lot more difficult to get these things nowadays. That's why the Tavistock clinic has been shut down, basically fractured into smaller regional clinics with a greater emphasis on mental health, because they couldn't answer the question, like, how do we know we're not harming these kids? Mm-hmm. And then the data came out and it's like, you actually are. The girls who are going on the puberty blockers are now more likely to self-harm than before going on puberty blockers. And so we've got all the evidence in front of us. It's almost like if you're navigating on your iPhone and you look at the road ahead of you and it's like, oh, there's a 60-car pile up with, fatality accidents and black ice, and I'm driving 80 miles an hour towards that, and it's a quarter mile ahead. What should we do? Let's put the pedal to the metal. That's what we're doing as an American culture. It's like, look, we've seen the carnage. The lawsuits are well underway, but until the medical institutions, pharmaceutical companies getting hit in the pocketbook with it, they're just going to go full steam ahead. What they need is kind of like a Bud Light experience of like losing $5 billion in value over the span of a week by going so woke. That's when they're going to listen up and change course. It's just the bottom line. At the end, it's not about what's in the best interest of these young people. I mean, corporate America, most of these guys and women running these companies are not all sold out on gender theory. They just say, it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And so these guys are following the bottom line. And so we've got to hit them in the pocketbooks. And that's where the lawsuits are going to come from. The detransitioners, then things are going to change. But how much trauma is going to be caused before that? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And that's the challenge. And I know folks like you referenced Paul McHugh, who was one of the leaders of that at Johns Hopkins University a number of years ago, about 9 years ago or so, kind of came out and said, listen, we need to stop this because the research just doesn't support that. If there is this dysphoria, again, let's go back to the issue. The issue at hand is that there are people who struggle with this disconnect within their body. Yeah. Okay, we recognize that as a reality. No one's taking that away. The question that has to become, whether you're a doctor or a therapist, is, well, what's the right course of treatment to help this person overcome this dysphoria? Yeah. And I did this, and it's funny, you did this in the book also. I remember when I was getting my PhD and we were learning about all the different psychosomatic disorders and the different disorders that fall into that in my doctorate class. And we were studying about, anorexia, or people who kind of lose feelings of their arms. And then we talked about gender dysphoria. And the course of treatment for each of those was coming to a greater acceptance of the body and the reality of the body, and accepting that. And so letting the internal kind of conform to the external. Rather than the external conforming to the internal. And so I proposed this question to my fellow students, and I said, listen, guys, why is it that with all of these, like we wouldn't tell somebody, a young woman who's anorexic, we would say, yeah, just keep taking those diet pills until your external finally matches what the internal is. Yeah. Or we wouldn't tell somebody who has this psychosomatic disorder, hey, cut off your arm so that the external matches what you're experiencing. We would never do that. But why is it that we do it with gender dysphoria? And I just asked the question, open for conversation. And they didn't, it's like I spoke a different language. You know what I mean? Like they didn't even resonate. They couldn't even understand, what the question was, or where we were coming from, because it speaks to just this disconnect that's here, this vast disconnect that's here. And that disconnect is, as you state in the book, it's rooted in two very different philosophical presuppositions, two very different ways of viewing the world and understanding reality, understanding the nature of language, understanding the nature of the body and the soul and its connection to all of that. And I think for me, one of my favorite chapters in the book, sincerely, was chapter 8, where you really kind of give this beautiful philosophical kind of background to this whole movement. And And I think I've known that because I've interviewed other moral theologians and individuals, but something about the way that was articulated in the book was, I guess I just didn't realize, or maybe became more aware of, not just that these theories were antithetical, but were really antagonistic to the faith. Like there was deliberate attempts to say that like the family genuinely is not just a hindrance, but it needs to be toppled over for the sake of liberation. Oh, yeah. And when you start reading that stuff, you're like, well, no wonder we get to the point that we get to right now. Yeah. You know, like feed your conscience. You know, like your mom would always say, like, you are who you hang out with. Well, now it's like you are who you watch on social media, you know, but the church would always say, feed your conscience. I mean, your mom would always say, you hang out with your friends. The church always says, feed your conscience. And so the way we think about reality, the philosophical presuppositions that we have that influence our way of just knowing the world is going to impact our behaviors. Oh, yeah. And so just what are your thoughts about that? And just kind of when you were diving into these different gender theorists and Marx and all this other stuff, like, yeah, what did you think about all that?
I mean, it's fascinating stuff because the majority of people who experience distress about their gender, are not trying to deconstruct gender and queer the binary and, reconstruct language with postmodern philosophy, behind them. Most of them are they're not, so much culture warriors as they are casualties of the culture war. And so we've got to make sure that we're making that distinction, that you're not having all these young people coming up with these thoughts, but you start to look at who are the intellectual architects behind this whole movement and what was their life like. It's staggering when you start to see, Marx and the things that they were saying about destroying the family, and that whole history is a history of class struggles. And then the second wave feminists starting to take that on with, Simone de Beauvoir and Judith Butler, and then Shulamith Firestone essentially saying, hey, look, the fundamental, problem is, the family. That's the issue. That is the cause of all of this male domination and patriarchy. And the only way to move forward is to just eliminate class distinctions. Just like, Marx was saying, the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, we got to just eliminate the class distinctions. Then we'll enter into this utopia. And so we need to do that with male and female. We need to destroy the family because that's the fundamental cause of women's oppression. And so they started to take this on. And then the feminists were like, oh, yeah. And so what we need to do is to eliminate gender distinctions, and then finally we'll be free from this patriarchal oppression. And so you see them starting to absorb these and take them on. And it was fascinating to me is how many of the people that were behind this were in favor of incest. It was really weird and creepy. I mean, you start to look at Simone de Beauvoir, she was involved in these quasi-incestuous relationships with her partner and their own teenage students. And then you have Judith Butler even saying that, it isn't always wrong to have an incestuous relationship. And then you have people like Shulamith Firestone, outright calling for this stuff to be legitimized. And then you look at Dr. John Money and the people that were involved in the medicalization of this, of how all of them were in favor of pedophilia and even practicing it themselves and incest. It's like, whoa, like if these are the intellectual architects behind this entire thing, hopefully that would cause anybody to question, okay, what's the end game if these are the minds of the ones who brought it through on a cultural level? Because what they're trying to do is with postmodern thought and deconstructionism is to understand from their perspective, we don't use language to describe reality. We craft language to shape reality. And that's why that language is such a huge piece of this cultural movement, is because they're trying to get us to rethink the way we look at reality by messing with language. And for most people, it makes your brain glitch when you start trying to think, okay, this trans woman did that. Wait, trans woman, is that is that a man or is that a woman? Like your brain slows down like a video game trying to wrap yourself around these concepts. And then you see, well, he did this and she did that. Well, wait a minute. She did that. Was that a guy who did it, who thinks he's a girl who did it? It's reframing the whole way we look at humanity, because if trans woman is one kind of woman, well, then I guess there's lots of different kinds of way to be a woman. Okay, well, wait a minute. No, is she a woman or is she a man? And so that's why language is such at the heart of this debate. And so as Catholics and as Christians, we need to be careful that we're not buying on, in a sense, to the language, that we're lovingly and reverently challenging. Well, wait a minute. Why are you talking about a biological male? Like, is there another kind of male? Isn't that talking about like a four-sided square, as if there's squares that don't have four sides? Like, we're not clarifying language, we're obfuscating it by adopting some of this terminology.
Hey everybody, taking a quick break from my conversation with Jason Evert to encourage you to check out Dating Well. It's my masterclass on dating. If you're single and want to know how to step into the dating scene, if you're in a relationship and not quite sure how to assess if the relationship's going well or looking for clear markers to be able to help you understand if things should continue or not, or maybe you just broke up and are trying to understand what went wrong and how to be better prepared for the next relationship. If you fall into any of those categories, then Dating Well is the program for you. I encourage you to please check it out by going to faithandmarriage.org. Click on the tab. It'll send you over to the page where you can purchase it. You can preview lesson 3 if you want. But it's been a wonderful course. I know it's helped so many individuals better navigate their experience of dating and to be able to provide some clarity to another topic that is very much in need of it. So head on over to faithandmarriage.org. Check out Dating Well. It will help you. And let's get back into this conversation with Jason Evert. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a war over language for sure, and that's why Jordan Peterson kind of stood up for it, and that's what got him. That's why he rose to fame was on that, because he was concerned about that question of language. But back to like the philosophers. It is telling, that even when we talk about like incest, okay, that it has to. There's like no middle ground here. It's like everything has to be on the table, or there has to be some logic that kind of starts differentiating like which behaviors are allowed and which ones aren't. And so but as soon as you start saying that, like you have to describe why, and so what was the Desire for the Everlasting Hills? I think that was excellent by Courage put that out. One of the women who is featured in that, she shares a story of her and her partner going to some festival or something like in Georgia, I think it was. And so they walked into this like out in the middle of the woods, and there was these two women that were just kind of openly pleasuring each other and with a group of people kind of around them. And when they got up, they realized that they were identical twins or something like that. Wow. And so the woman who's in the documentary, she says, I turned to my partner and I said, well, that just feels wrong, doesn't it? Like, what do you think about that? And her partner said, well, as soon as we say, that's wrong, what's not to say that what we're doing is wrong, And so it brings up this question again immediately of like, well, if it isn't, it's otherwise everything has to be kind of on the same plane, and all sexual behaviors and all sexual interactions have to be equal, which is what you said is the intention of this movement. Like, this is the Marxist element of it. This is we got to break away from any sort of distinction that even exists, or we have to be able to say that we have to have some classifications and recognize that there's some order in this. And classifications aren't inherently discriminatory. To have descriptions on things doesn't inherently make it derogatory or offensive. And I think that's the problem, is that we feel like, okay, any sort of label that we put on it, it's like all of a sudden, man, like you're it's like, no, I'm not trying to offend any, can we just agree that this thing in front of me is called a microphone? Like, this is a microphone, okay? We have to have language around this, okay? Like, because if we can't all agree that this thing here that's right in front of my face is a microphone, then how can you and I even communicate if you have a different word for this and I have a different word for this? Now we're speaking two different languages, and then we can't even dialogue, we can't even converse, we can't even share experience anymore. Which is why this postmodern deconstructive thought, at the end of the day, when you talked about even this in the book, so many of these people died by like suicide, depression. They ended up, losing lives in very, hardship ways. Why? Because you follow this stuff out to its logical conclusion, and you are left completely isolated and completely fragmented from everything. And that's why, yes, agreed. we have to tend to people in their individuals, absolutely, but there also needs to be some attention to the philosophical. Not that the individuals are engaged in these culture wars. I love that you said that. Absolutely right. But just have to be aware of what's feeding people's conscience and what was those sources that are causing the flood that are affecting people, downstream now.
Yeah, and I think your point explains why historically this kind of transgender moment followed on the heels of gay marriage.
Yeah.
Now, before the gay marriage was the contraception. And so you start to trail it back. Yep. Dr. Judith Butler said that sexual behavior has the power to destabilize gender. And it's like, whoa, hit the nail on the head there. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense that if our sex is determined by how an organism is organized for reproduction, and all of a sudden we remove from the sexual act the significance of reproduction, then it's just two bodies doing pleasurable things with one another. There's no inherent meaning to this act. And so you can see how that flows directly from contraception into same-sex sexual relationships, and then how that flows directly from that into bodies don't even matter to begin with. Male, female, husband, wife, father, mother, it's kind of all up for grabs. And so understanding that principle that this feminist, second wave, very extreme philosopher Judith Butler said that sexual behavior has the power to destabilize gender. And so what we needed to do is change sexual behavior by allowing contraception. What flowed from that is the gay marriage. What's flowed from that historically then has this been questioning of what does it even mean to be male and female. And so, once we start to understand the historical and philosophical roots to these things, you can see what direction we're heading and then where this is going to leave us as a culture if father, mother, husband, wife, male, female doesn't even mean anything. And that's why we're at this chaotic point of like, wait a minute, we're so insistent on using preferred pronouns, but what are you supposed to do when a woman's in court and her rapist she has to testify against? Are you going to make that victim of sexual assault refer to her rapist with female pronouns because that's what he wants you to call her? Are you going to impose that? Like, are you going to really put male prisoners in female prisons? And now you've got pregnancy, rape, and sexual assault. Like, where is this all leading? I mean, the writing's on the wall, but we don't want to see it.
Yeah. The contraception piece is significant because it's the first time that we looked at something like fertility specifically and said that this needs to be blocked. So it's the first time that we used medicine to say, rather than curing something, it was actually to suppress something. So we'd take Tylenol if my head hurts. I'd go on chemotherapy if I have cancer. And then now I have this thing that's normal functioning. My body's functioning normal. And now I'm going to take this medicine to suppress it. And that the widespread nature of that cannot be understated in terms of how this has impacted us today. We just take it for granted as a culture that contraception is the norm. And so therefore we're just communicating, not even overtly, but it is overt, but it's subtly, it's communicated that fertility is wrong, fertility is bad. You have to suppress it. You have to stop it. And what's more important than that is being able to engage in the sexual behavior as you see fit. And so that then has opened up the door, as you stated, for, you're right. What fundamentally is the difference between a man and a woman who are contracepting, have rendered themselves sterile, and then a man and a man, or a woman and a woman? At the end, at that point, it is just about, being able to engage in whatever sexual activity feels best, which is why we're at where we're at. And like you said, now we're not just even talking about sexual activity. We're talking about identity. Why? Because the two go hand in hand. Yeah. And so we are in a mess. We are in a mess.
And then the doctors essentially become pharmaceutical vending machines that, you're a medical provider. Well, think of just the utilitarian nuance to that term. You're a medical provider. I tell you what drugs I want, you give them to me, and I get the end I want, instead of the do no harm, motto of the medical industry of like, okay, are we helping people, as you said, their bodies to function normally, or we are inducing diseased states of infertility and the lack of puberty because that's what the client wants? So you've got to distribute it because the client is in control of their own treatment pathway. We're getting the whole thing backwards. And so like by giving these kids puberty blockers, I mean, you're actually inducing a diseased state in their body. I mean, it's called Kalman syndrome if you're supposed to be having puberty and you're not having puberty. That's when you give medicine to induce puberty as it should be. Now we're giving these kids, Lupron that's given to chemically castrate male sex offenders to kind of shut off their puberty and pausing their bone development. We've got like 15-year-old boys now with osteoporosis from this stuff. It's just from the inversion of what is the purpose of medicine, just like what is the purpose of our sexuality.
Yeah, but it goes back to what you said earlier about language. Does language exist to describe reality, or is it there to impose reality and to be able to create my reality? So if it exists to impose my reality, well, then you and anybody else that's in the way of it is just wrong, because I get to impose and create whatever reality I want. So that's where we're at. Okay, so bringing this back down to the individual. All right, pronouns. What's a pastoral response here? Okay, so if somebody comes into our youth group and says, you know, as a boy, and now wants to start presenting as a young woman, and wants to use the pronoun she, and is asking people to use the pronoun she, what is the appropriate response there, and how do we pastorally respond to the use of pronouns?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everything needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis, and what I mean by that is, let's say I'm at work and there is an employee who used to be, I mean, it was a male, but has transitioned full on. I mean, everything, surgeries, hormones, everything, attire, and everybody thinks this is a female and wants to be recognized as such. But I discover that that's a male. And so truth has to hold out, win the day. You are not Roberta, you are Robert, and I'm just insisting on it. You could see how there'd be a lack of Christian charity there, in the sense like, hey, what I'm saying is true. Well, yeah, it is. But if you really want to help that individual, you're kind of incinerating any bridge that could have been built with them, because that could be really distressful to them to hear that name. And you don't know why it's creating that much distress. I know of some girls who had been sexually abused, and then after the abuse, basically said, I couldn't wait to get my breasts off after that abuse, because they associated that body part with the unresolved trauma from that encounter. And so in a sense, when we're kind of forcing their what they call dead naming, and you're gonna get this name whether you like it or not, to me, we have to take a more sensitive approach. And what I mean by that is, okay, if this pronoun causes a lot of distress for you just to hear, at least what I can do is try to avoid it. I'm gonna, maybe I could use your name, your last name, maybe a nickname or whatever, but try to avoid that pronoun in a sense. Okay, I'm not gonna just go with whatever you say and call you whatever you want to be called, but I can at least begin by not using that which creates a lot of distress there. But if it comes to the head, what I would try to say is, look, you know that I love you, and you know that I know this is very important to you, and therefore it matters to me. But I would never want to hurt you, but I think you also know I would never want to lie to you. And I feel like if I were to use that pronoun in reference to you, I would feel like I'm being dishonest with you, and I don't want to do that. And I hope you know that I don't reject you because of your beliefs on this matter. And I really hope that you don't reject me because my beliefs happen to be different, because the world's a really big place with lots of different viewpoints. And I think we could stand to learn a lot from each other if we could make room for each other in our different lives. And hopefully with that tact, they can see that you're not saying, hey, I'm a transphobic bigot and I hate you. It's that, like, I love you enough to respond to you with a little bit of challenge here, to be truly inclusive of my opinions as well as yours. And let's walk together in this. I don't have all the answers, but maybe we can find them together, because we want to make room for that kid, in the sense that the church has room for you as you try to navigate through these difficult questions of gender. And obviously for the leaders, it's a tightrope at times, because it's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, I want to bring this kid the gospel, and I want this kid to encounter God and to find healing. But in the same respect, you ain't going to the girls' cabin. You're not going to the girls' bathroom. There's certain places we have to draw the line, certain places where we have to make reasonable accommodations that don't undermine church teaching. And so, like, let's say the kid wants to be in the girls' small group, but it's a boy. Okay, well, we've got these small groups segregated by sex. Well, maybe on the retreat, what if we just had co-ed, small groups? And that way that person could come on the retreat. We could still have some great small group discussions. And yeah, granted, it's not going to be the ideal of what we hope with the girls having their discussion in their cabin and the boys over here. But if we can make some little small and reasonable accommodations that don't cave in the church's teachings on these things, maybe we can start to build a pastoral relationship with that person that could last many, many years, that could help that person gradually out of that distress, instead of being like, nope, this is the way it is. It's my way or the highway. And it's challenging, because if your daughter comes to you and says, Mom, Dad, I'm trans, call me he or this or that, I want a binder. Obviously, you don't just kind of go along with whatever the kid thinks. You've got to be lovingly walking with them and helping them to understand this ultimately will not lead to human flourishing. Trust me, I love you. Let's walk in this together.
Yeah. Amen. And it is tricky because there is, as we stated, there's a lot of fear. And the fear, and so to speak about this for a second, the narrative that often is thrown out, well, would you rather have a dead son or an alive daughter, or a alive daughter, dead son? That there's a lot of push to say that if you don't go along with this, hook, line, and sinker, that it is going to result in this person committing suicide. Yeah. Now, you state clearly in the book that the numbers are like that statement is not actually, that's not entirely fabricated. Like, there is a lot of research that supports the fact that individuals who have transgenderism experience higher rates of suicidality. And the studies that you spoke about, I read the McHugh Lawrence Mayer research, as well as the research from Sweden that followed all these, I think like 130 individuals over the span of like 20 years. And the suicide rates were like 7 times higher. I mean, after
19 times higher.
After the surgeries, And so there's like, we can't dismiss that comment and be like, well, you're just being sensational. So there's some truth to that. So how do parents again navigate that where there is truth to say that there's increased suicide rates, but there's also this kind of, for lack of a better word here, this kind of fear mongering in that sense that it's like, if you don't do this, then it's going to result in this person's death. And that's almost kind of, that's manipulative, that's a manipulative kind of language, is to use somebody's fears against them to be able to get what you want. Again, bringing this back down to the most local level, parents are aware of this. Parents hear these stories. Parents read the news. Parents are on, Facebook and such. How do we respond to that? How do we alleviate some of those fears if a parent is trying to navigate this pastorally without caving it completely, but also doesn't want to succumb to this fear as well? How do we navigate that?
Well, I think the first thing we need to understand is that 90% of people who commit suicide have a diagnosable mental health disorder. And when you look at the group of young people who experience gender dysphoria who are committing suicide, they have comparable suicide rates to young people who have the same other mental health issues in terms of the anxiety and the depression and the autism, the trauma, the abuse. When you look at what's going on in their lives at the same time and look at kids that have those same issues but not gender dysphoria, you're looking at the same suicide rates. And that's why after you go through these procedures, for the boys and girls together, it's about 19 times higher suicide rate about a decade after the surgical procedure. When you isolate out the female to male transitioners, it's a suicide rate more than 40 times higher than the general population. And people say, well, that's because of you transphobic bigots and, you're hostile to them and that's why they're doing this. Well, we need to first, let's see, is there some merit to this, what's called the social stress model, that because of these hostile environments, they're taking their lives? Well, a lot of these people do suffer a lot of hostility from in their families, their church communities. It's extremely difficult to find gainful employment if you're trying to present as the opposite sex and you're not passing very well. A lot of companies don't want to hire you. They turn to a lot of homelessness, a lot of sex work, which inherently has a high suicide rate, lots of crime. So there's a lot of factors going on. So we don't want to just dismiss the social stress model altogether. No, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Well, no, that is a factor, but you also have to look at the fact that there's all these other mental health issues going on. But what's going on is if we're using the body as the target of intervention, it's a distraction from what's going on psychologically that might need clinical intervention right now. And so that's why the gender clinics in the UK are changing their tone, because they started looking at this and I was like, we've been doing this for years. These kids psychologically are not better off after puberty blockers. They're more likely to self-harm. Their suicide rates aren't dropping after we're putting all these procedures. Over time, it's just going up. And so that suicide narrative is extremely powerful for these adults and parents who just want to do what's best for their kids. But I mean, look historically, before this massive wave of rapid onset gender dysphoria, did you have all these people committing suicide that now aren't committing suicide because they have puberty blockers accessible? No. I mean, some of the people that ran these clinics said, we asked ourselves, are we actually creating the problem by offering this service? of promising people, oh, if you could just get this, it's all going to be peachy. And then the kids do that, they're feeding into the narrative themselves. And so the data is not supportive of this idea that if we just put these kids down that treatment pathway, it's all going to be sunshine and lollipops. The opposite is true. And that's why when these detransitioners start speaking up and sharing their stories, a lot of the people who are considering transitioning recant. In fact, they did what was interesting over in England. They had a psychologist who's working with a support group of young people experiencing gender dysphoria. He had another support group of people who had transitioned and now were detransitioning. And he thought, well, what would happen if we put these two support groups together? What happened when he joined the two support groups is 98% of the kids who wanted to transition lost any interest of transitioning. Wow. Because they had personal contact with people they really related to. He had suffered various forms of distress, tried this as a treatment pathway, and realized, nope, it just created more problems because I still have these deeper issues, and now my breasts are missing. I still have these deeper issues, and now I have to be on synthetic testosterone for the rest of my natural life because I had an orchiectomy. Now I don't have anything to produce testosterone in my body, even though now I want to re-identify with my masculine identity. Now I need to be a pharmaceutical patient until I'm dead in order to get fake hormones to make up for the real hormones my body can't make anymore. And so when young people see where this often leads, they realize, okay, well, maybe it's time to address these deeper core wounds.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Okay. So I know we're bucking up to the end of our time here, but a question I just need to ask, because this has come up in conversation with a few folks, is what if the comment is this, like, why does the church care? And why do we even care about this? It's just to say, if gay people are married, like, why does gay marriage really impact heterosexual? Like, what are gay marriages taken away from heterosexual marriages? Like, what embracing transgender, what does that really take away from everybody else who has a regular gender kind of orientation there? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's asking the wrong question. I had heard of an evangelical woman I was listening to speak on the subject of gay marriage. And she said, what we really need is an international child's rights movement, that children have a right to their biological mother and father. And my wife cannot be replaced by a man, let alone by an army of 10,000 men. Motherhood is simply not that interchangeable and disposable that we can just say, oh, it doesn't make a difference. Kids know the difference. And so the reason the church cares about this issue of gender is because the church cares about human beings. That's why John Paul II said, the truth that the church owes to man is first and foremost the truth about man. And so during this time where we don't even know what it means to be male and female, this is where the church can step in, not with condemnation, but with clarity, with compassion, of being like, hey, you were not born into the wrong body. You were born into the wrong culture, a culture that's telling you might have to hurt your body in order to be your authentic self. It's not your body that needs to be reconstructed. It's our culture that needs to be reconstructive. And so don't think that, as a girl, that you need to like hurt your body because you don't fit into this narrow stereotypical box of womanhood. Well, maybe womanhood isn't supposed to be a little box. Maybe it's a firm foundation that you can stand upon to bloom into whoever God created you to be, without needing to hurt your body in the process. And so, unfortunately, I think there's going to be a lot of carnage before we rediscover masculinity and femininity as God created them to be. And it's going to be a process, but I really think a lot of the evangelists and apostles for this new movement are going to be the casualties of gender theory, who have really tried that and realized, okay, this was not the answer to my deep distress. And it set me on a quest. And I discovered myself and God in the process. And I think we need to give those individuals platforms. And they're already speaking up. I mean, there's like 43,000 of them on reddit.com, just screaming from the rooftops and starting lawsuits and websites and blogs. And so to me, those are going to be the wounded prophets, in a sense, that are able to bring the good news to those who are about to come through this process thinking that it's the answer. And so we need to let all these voices be heard.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Jason, we could talk for another hour. I'm so grateful for the time you've given to me. So if people are loving what they're hearing and they want to be able to get the book, what's the best way to go about that?
You just go to chastity.com, and the name of the book is Male, Female, Other, A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. And in bulk, they're only $6 a copy because we want people to get them by the box and give them out. to the teens in youth group, give them out to the high school religion classes, give them out, in your parish, because everybody's going through this in one way or another. Like, I've got a niece who identifies as trans. What am I supposed to do here? And so the book has been proofed by endocrinologists, specialists of pediatric medicine, philosophers, theologians, multiple psychologists, and even people in the trans community I had read it to help me know, how is this landing on your heart, and how can I word this in a way that'll help you to receive the church's teachings without feeling that we're against you. And so I've sent it out to a lot of people who've given me tons of really helpful feedback. But like I said, you go to chastity.com, click the book, read it, and please share it.
Great. We'll have links to that in the show notes for sure, to people to be able to access it. And Jason Evert, final question I ask all my first-time guests: what gives you hope?
What gives me hope, I think, are the detransitioners. And I think they're going to really have a persuasive voice in this battle. And what ultimately gives me hope is I already know what the end score of the game is. I know who wins. I know it could get a little uglier before it gets prettier, but in a sense, we're already watching a movie that we know how it's going to end. Christ is going to win. God is going to win. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. I mean, like I said, I don't know what's going to happen in the meantime, but God wins. And so we just need to step up with love and with truth, and not allow all the cultural craziness going on to make us lose our peace, because Christ gave that to us as a gift, and we shouldn't toss it aside.
Amen. Amen. And I think that last thing that you said is something that we have to monitor within ourselves. So if we are on YouTube and the algorithm keeps popping up about all these crazy libs of TikTok and all these other videos that we just feel disturbs our peace, let it go. Let it go. If it just breeds a sense of contempt for the other side, you got to let it go, because that's not loving as Christ does. And so we need to be able to put ourselves in a posture where we absolutely are firmly within the truth, but also firmly within an openness in an evangelical heart to want to be able to witness and minister to those who are struggling and to those who think differently than us. So,
amen. Don't let the media manipulate your emotions into thinking that we're all enemies with each other, because the way it is in journalism, like, if it bleeds, it leads. Yeah. And so it's all the clickbait stuff. And so don't let yourself get emotionally manipulated and think they hate you, you hate them. It's like, sit down, have lunch with these individuals, and you'll discover they're wonderful human beings.
That's right. And think about it just a little bit and recognize that this stuff is, of course, wanting to get you to act in a certain way also and be reactive. So, all righty. Well, Jason, man, I appreciate the time. God bless you, and continue the good work that you're doing. And I pray for the success of the book, and may it fall in the right hands of everybody who needs it. So,
thanks so much. Thank you for having me on.
Bless you. All right, everybody. Well, that does it for my conversation with Jason Evert. And I just want to end today's episode by saying that every time, I have a show that touches on a sensitive topic like today with transgenderism, that all I want is to be a place of dialogue for folks. I don't think everybody agrees, of course, with the things that we discussed, and that's fine. But dialogue is the way forward with these social issues. There's just no way around us not being able to talk. We have to be able to engage. We have to resist. We have to resist the temptation to just wall ourselves off and put ourselves in a camp, and then just kind of come up with narratives that vilify the other side. We have to engage. We have to engage. We have to engage. And so, if you are an individual or a parent or a family member who came to the show because you have a loved one who is struggling with these questions, then God bless you. There aren't easy answers, we know. And just trusting in God's providence and his love for you. If you're somebody who is struggling with these questions yourself, please do not turn away from your faith. Draw closer to it. Moments of suffering often bring us closer to the Lord if we can be patient and persist through it. If we can honor the questions that we're asking, be willing to navigate the complexity of the circumstances within our heart, and not being quick to rush to judgment one way or the other. And so, God bless you all. Thank you so much. Have a great day.